yang, which the Mandarins so treasured.
This is a good piece of calligraphy. Some moist, some dry, some thin, some thick, some big, some small, some big, and some fast, some slow.
In both their lives and their art, they strove to attain a harmonious, balanced relationship between their roles as stern administrators and their more sensitive, artistic, Taoist spirit. No artist was better at doing this, at expressing his personality in his work, than a certain eccentric monk who lived during the 9th century, Zhang Shu. Legend has it that he would walk around drunk and sobbing until he sat down to perform some calligraphic magic. He allowed his brush to gallop across the paper, curling, twisting in one unbroken stroke. The novelty and quality and originality of his work had nobles lining up to buy a sample, and emperors down the centuries scrambling to own some small piece of his genius. This is his work called Cure for Stomachache. It is highly polished by the rubbing of countless scholars who have copied it over the centuries. They copied it not because they suffered from stomachache, but because they could see the indomitable spirit of the man reflected in the way he wrote his characters, making the crazy, wild, yet highly skilled calligraphy a treasured work of art. With Zhang Shu, calligraphy became a visible expression of personality. The Mandarins inherited this concept of expressing feelings through artistic creation and adopted it for their own painting, most famously during the 14th century Yuan dynasty, when the native Chinese were conquered and ruled by the Mongols. During this time, the Mandarins, who normally would have served at court, found themselves at a loss for what to do, since the Mongols chose not to employ most of them to administer their newly conquered empire. Those scholar officials who were invited to serve faced a terrible dilemma. If they joined the new Mongol administration, they could be branded traitors. If they withdrew out of loyalty to the vanquished Chinese emperor and finished their lives in seclusion, they would be forced to support themselves and their families as best they could with their talents. Most chose the latter path. The best of them, however, did not. Chao Mingfu became a high-ranking official in the Mongol court, and he was despised for it. Nevertheless, he became one of China's most famous artists. His emphasis on the blending of calligraphy, literature, and painting became the ideal for Mandarins in later centuries. In this work, he made use of sparse and abbreviated brushstrokes to express his loneliness and inner longing for the open countryside with its mountains and woods. It is an evocation of a state of mind whose symbolic meaning far outweighs its depiction of reality. Nizan, a highly educated man, took the opposite path by refusing office under the Mongols. He was forced to sell the family estate and thereafter lived on a boat on the lakes. He painted in light ink on paper with delicate, dry brushwork. Using crisply etched lines, his paintings depict scene after scene of desolate silence and loneliness. Pine trees on an island symbolize himself and his scholar friends. Asked why his paintings never show any figures, he answered, "How can there be any human beings in this age of ours?" For Nishan and most Chinese Mandarin painters after him, scenery was a state of mind. And if we look closely, we can also find the Confucian philosophy of the Mandarins in their paintings. Confucius taught respect for the authority of ancient masters, and so the scholar painters often followed the style of one of the great masters of an earlier period, sometimes copying them stroke for stroke. Forgery took on a new ambiguity. Artists were supposed to closely copy old masterworks. Thus, a Chinese painting from 100 years ago often looks very similar to one painted 1,000 years ago. As you can imagine, having so many copies around made it difficult to tell an original from a fake. So Chinese painters often stamped their paintings with seals in red ink to guard against forgery. Chinese collectors would also sometimes stamp an acquired painting to show their ownership and refined taste. The seals may seem distracting at first, but for Chinese connoisseurs, seals provide an additional dimension and depth to the experience of viewing a painting. The Mandarins realized well-placed seals could play a pleasing role in a painting's overall composition. However, they can also have the opposite effect. One particular emperor in the 18th century was so fond of his paintings, he was determined to place his giant seal in the middle of many masterpieces, defacing them forever with his imperial vandalism. He stamped the beautiful calligraphy of Wang Zixue, painted 1,500 years before. And the greatest landscape paintings. Fortunately, his officials were able to slip him some fakes from time to time and save the originals from defacement. But most Mandarins stamped their own paintings with taste and stamped ancient paintings out of respect to continue a dialogue with the ancient past. Chinese painting has maintained a remarkable continuity over the centuries. Because, for the Chinese Mandarin painter, the hard-won knowledge of ancient masters was not to be thrown away or wasted. It was a tradition to be cherished and emulated. Another factor which makes Chinese paintings look so unique is the set of tools used by the Mandarin artists. Known as the 4 treasures of the scholar's table, these tools were the primary materials for both calligraphy